Welcome to the Wise Doula podcast, a place for informative, uplifting, and educational conversations. Here, we will discuss all things connected with parenting, from conception to birth, postpartum, and beyond. You are amongst friends here, so go ahead and grab a cup of your favorite drink. Remember, not caffeinated if you are expecting, and join me inside. I can't wait to speak with you. Our guest today is Katie La Morte. Katie is a mom, a wife, and a daughter, and an overachiever like so many of us. Katie was working as an HR professional in the education setting, and upon delivering her second baby, found a big struggle in keeping work and life balance. Katie went on to experience postpartum depression, and after that, she decided to make changes in her life. This is a success story. Katie went on to find balance in between life, work, and family, and she went on to become a coach. Today, she is going to tell us more about her journey. This is a story of struggles, a story of ups and downs, and ultimately of success. It's a story of finding that balance. And I'm very excited for all of you to hear her story and what she's going to share. On to the episode. See you inside. Katie, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Yeah, it's totally exciting. I'm really glad that you're here to give my listeners an opportunity to learn more about your story and understand more about your postpartum journey.
Mhm.
So,
Definitely. Thank you.
absolutely. So, how about we begin at the beginning? What would you say is your origin story? What's the story of your um, of becoming a mother um, while working? Just get us started understanding a little bit of that background.
Sure. It's kind of funny. I feel like my current origin story really starts with being pregnant with my second child. And that, becoming a mom for a second time is where I really found my power and my identity as a mother. And as many origin stories go, you have to go through the fire to come out stronger on the other side. Um, so with my second child, my son, I let's see, I was pregnant. I unfortunately shortly after getting pregnant, I lost my mom to cancer. And so it definitely started out very, very stressful, and that weight of responsibility and knowing that I was grieving for my mom, but also that I had this little life inside of me that I knew that my emotions and my stress and my sadness would affect him. And so trying to manage that while at the same time continuing in my career. That same year that I lost my mom, I actually got promoted into an HR director role at my organization.
Hmm.
Um, and it didn't hugely change my job, but it came with the title. And sometimes, even though the job responsibilities don't change as much, because I was already in charge of the strategy for our organization, and
Hmm.
I already had a team of four wonderful women that were reporting to me and helping me manage all the HR stuff for the organization. Just that pressure of having that title was very stressful, and knowing that I was getting ready to go on to maternity leave. Um, and so as I got closer to maternity leave, and I knew, especially the way my role was and how stressful it was and the level of responsibility I had and the ability that I had, which was, most of the time very exciting to have widespread impact on our employees. I knew that as I got closer to having this baby, it was very, very important for me, for the organization, to step back from that. Because, again, this was my second child. So I remembered what that last month of pregnancy was like, and that my brain did not function at a strategic, critical level. And so I knew I wasn't going to be able to do my job. And out I'm in California, and in California, it's pretty standard for your doctor to start talking about putting you on pregnancy disability about 4 weeks before your due date. And so I decided very early on that, yep, this time around, I was going to do that with my first child. I was a little bit crazy and thought I would be bored, decided to work all the way up to my due date. I greatly
Wow.
regret that now. Had no idea. Bored. Funny. So this time around, I knew better, and I very early talked with my manager, with my CEO,
Mm.
and letting her know my intentions for maternity leave, and that I would approximately be going out at this date. And again, and being in HR, like I was very familiar and able to express, okay, this is what a typical pregnancy disability leaves. This is what doctors typically do here. These are, what the job protections are. And, I knew that in and out because it was my job. And so I communicated that to her very, very early, and she seemed fine with it at first, and, very excited for me at first. But
Mhm.
as we got closer and closer to me going out and setting up our plans and bringing in a consultant to cover my job responsibilities, I began to feel this tension with us.
Mhm.
And at first, I tried to just shrug it off and be like, "Well, you know what? I'm very pregnant. I'm very emotional and hormonal right now.
Right.
Like, maybe I'm just, reading into this." And again, being an HR director, like, I can't avoid conflict. Like, I can't be afraid of, conflict and uncomfortable
Mhm.
conversations. So I decided, I'm just gonna ask her about it. I'm gonna clear the air. And so one day I asked her, I'm like, "Hey, I've been feeling a little tension between us. Are you okay with me going out on maternity leave?" And I'll never forget it. We were on a Zoom meeting, and she stopped looking at the camera. She looked down and kind of started fiddling with her hands, and she goes, "Well, I'm
Oof.
gonna have to put my legal hat on." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, you have to put your legal, what are you about to say to me?" And she's like, "Of course, I know, you're the HR director. I know you're doing everything right, and you're not, taking advantage of anything, but I just, I just feel like some of the other executive leaders really, feel like you're just going on vacation on this maternity leave." And I'm like,
Wow.
"Okay, so let me
Wow.
explain." One, yeah, when people ask me, "Hey, are you looking forward to going on maternity leave?" Of course, I'm going to say yes, because there is a lot of joy into it. And when you ask me, what am I going to do for those 4 weeks before my due date? I'm going to meditate. I'm going to do yoga. I am going to rest my body as much as possible. Yes, that sounds like a vacation, but it's not. It's a really critical thing to do to prep yourself for birth. And again, having this be my second child, I knew what I was in for. And I knew how important it was to make sure that not only was I physically ready for this, I was mentally ready to give birth. And I only honestly felt like, I'm like, wow, I'm like really cutting it to the wire here, waiting to 4 weeks before my due date to do all of this. Um, and I was like, There's a real medical reason for me going out on leave. Like, my doctor is recommending that I do this."
Mhm.
But it was incredibly, a frustrating and disheartening conversation, because I had spent the last, almost 3 years at this organization, really building up their leave of absence, and especially their pregnancy leave of absence policies and communication, because the organization that I worked for was a charter school management company. So I did the HR for 3 charter schools, and as you can imagine, we had a ton of teachers, a ton of young women who were starting their families. And one of the cultural changes that I had really made in the last 3 years was getting these teachers more comfortable with taking a leave of absence.
Mhm.
because when I started, there was this fear of losing their jobs if they, took their leave of absence, if they didn't continue working. And it's a little bit of a unique situation because this charter school is a homeschool based charter school. And so all the
Mhm.
teachers work pretty much 90% remote. So a lot of stuff they can do from home and it's very
Right.
flexible. But I started this organization with these stories of these women answering emails while in labor. Like they're in the
Oh,
hospital
wow.
preparing to have babies and they are still answering emails to their students and their families, which, I admire their dedication to their students. But that is not the time and it's not appropriate and it's not it was kind of a bragging right, quite honestly. So I spent a lot of time changing that
Mhm.
dialogue and the conversation around that and creating understanding and comfort and really empowering these women to spend time with their families without being
Right.
feeling like they were being pulled in half,
Right.
and pulled between their responsibilities at work and the
Mhm.
student families that they really cared about and their own family. And I had really moved the needle on this. Like, and I heard it from so many of the employees, and we had so many more of our teachers actually go on the pregnancy disability and the maternity leaves. And I was so glad to see that. So here
Mhm.
I was, it was my turn, right? And I'm, talking to my manager, the CEO, and suddenly I'm like, "Oh, I get why before I got here, why there was this cultural, idea that it wasn't okay to take, because I am
Mhm.
the HR director and you're telling me you feel like I'm going on vacation. Like, you don't understand the medical need and how important this is." Um,
Absolutely.
and so, yeah, so I was just so disappointed, and that conversation ended with we had a leadership consultant working with our executive team, and we were doing a bunch
Mhm.
of meetings and that kind of thing. And the day before my due date, they were having a big meeting with all the executive leaders, and she's like, well, you're not required to be there, but if you'd like to attend the meeting, you're more than welcome. I'm like, no, no, I'm preparing to have a baby. This is a day before my due date. I am not attending any
No.
kind of work meeting.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so I was incredibly disheartened. And anyway,
Mm.
I went on maternity leave, and my son, just like my daughter, did not decide to follow mommy's plan as far as
Mhm.
my labor plan went, and I ended up needing my second emergency C-section. My daughter was an emergency C-section. She decided to go breech a day before I went into labor. Nobody knew. I showed up in the hospital, in labor, and they're, checking, and they're like, we don't feel her head." Uh, we found out she all of a sudden was breech. So,
Mhm.
with my son, fortunately, he didn't go breech on me, but he was a week late, and he was just not interested in coming out, and there were some issues with his heartbeat, and it got scary because there were, a couple times where they couldn't find his heartbeat anymore.
Oh.
And so it led to another emergency C-section.
Mhm.
And fortunately, everything worked out fine. He was totally fine. They have no idea why, his heartbeat couldn't be heard for whatever reason.
Right.
And everything was good, but it was unexpected. And it definitely changes the pregnancy disability plan.
Mhm.
And after the birth and going to my first couple appointments with my doctor, and I asked her, it's like, okay, so this was my second C-section. Last time you had me on pregnancy disability for 8 weeks. Should I plan on that again? Just so I can communicate with my employer and
Mhm.
see how my return date needs to shift a little bit. And fortunately, I had the same doctor that had when I gave birth to my daughter. So we had a really good history. She
Mhm.
knew about my first birth and my recovery with that one. And she looks at me and she goes, Katie, was the 8 weeks enough last time? And I paused and I was like, honestly, 8 weeks was the soonest I could sit in a chair all day. Like, I
Right.
was still uncomfortable, but it's the soonest I could have, sat there and then done nothing else. Like, it, would have wiped me out. And she's
Mhm.
like, "Okay, that's what I thought. Let's plan on 12 weeks instead." And I was like, "Oh my god." And just the relief to know that I
Mhm.
had the time to, both physically recover and mentally recover. And I think that's the
Mhm.
piece that people don't talk about as much. After you give birth, like, yes, there's a huge physical recovery, but there's also
Right.
a huge mental recovery that's needed. And you're not getting any sleep to do that mental recovery. It takes time. And so I was so grateful to her to see that need that I had, and giving me that extra time to heal. And so then I sent a message to my boss and, and told her, "Hey, things went, unexpected with the labor. I had an unexpected C-section. Just talked to my doctor, and she's going to put me on pregnancy disability for 12 weeks now." And then in California, California also offers 8 weeks of partially paid baby bonding time. And that's not based on a medical need the way pregnancy disability is,
Mhm.
but it is an option available, and one that I encourage all employees to do because you need that time to bond with your new family unit. And so I told her, pregnancy disability is going to push me out to this date, and I'm still going to take these 8 weeks of bonding time as well. So it's not changing. I'm not going to shortchange myself just because the disability piece has extended. Um, and instead of getting a response that was, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry that things went sideways. I'm glad you're okay," or, "Is everybody okay? Like, how's your healing going?" I got a very short response that was, "Thanks for letting me know. I'll run it by the team." And I'm like, "You'll run what by the team?
Mm,
This is a
yep.
medically necessary
Yep.
leave of absence. I am the HR director.
And
Like,
I'm not asking
you
for
what?"
permission.
Yeah, I'm not asking for permission here. You have no power to deny this. This is a legally protected right, you
Mhm.
know? And I was astounded. I was absolutely astounded. Um, but anyway, I shook it off. I had a new baby, and I was like, "I am not worrying about work right now. I am going to concentrate on my family unit,
Mhm.
healing, and just enjoying, this time." And so I didn't, as I tell all employees who go on leave, I'm like, "Do not, don't feel the need to reach out to work. Like, you don't need to be working. You don't need to be worrying about it. Like, so don't worry about reaching out to us until you get a little closer to returning." And I followed my own advice, and I didn't reach out until, a couple weeks before my return date.
Mhm.
Um, and everything was in order, and I went back to work. Well, when I went back to work, my manager and CEO, she kind of gave me the cold shoulder. Like, I saw her a couple times, like, in like big groups of people where she was on display, and she'd make a big like hoopla, like, "Oh, Katie, you're back! I'm so
Mhm.
excited!" All of
Mm.
that. But if she didn't have an audience,
Right.
she didn't reach out to me. She didn't take the time to connect with me and tell me about all the stuff that I had missed, the things that I might need to know coming
Right.
back. Um, she made one excuse after another not to meet with me. I was back for 3 weeks before she met with me. Um,
Wow.
like,
Wow.
it was incredible. And again, like, I try to assume the best with people.
Mhm.
And at first I was like, "Oh, it's the beginning of the school year. It's very busy. She's very busy. It's fine." But other leaders started noticing and mentioning it. And they're like, "Is is she giving you the cold shoulder? Like, is she, what's going on?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, well, we haven't really chatted, but it just, when other people start noticing, you're like, okay, so it's not in my head."
Right.
Um,
Right.
and then we finally did talk, and during that conversation, she told me, she's like, "Honestly, I was surprised you came back. Like, I have never had an employee go on leave who didn't check in regularly during leave." And I'm like, "No, that's not
Wow.
what leave is about. Leave is about disconnecting from work and
Right.
focusing on your family." Um,
Right.
and
That's
in
the
my head, I'm
definition.
yeah, and in my head, I'm like, "Okay, the one time I did reach out to you, the response I got was not warm and fuzzy, didn't really open any doors, like, you wanted to know what was going on with me." And so it became very clear that she was mad at me for taking this leave and kind of, um, to a low level, retaliating against me a little bit
Mhm,
with
mhm,
her behavior. And then the other thing that happened shortly after I came back was one of our executive leaders who, been with the organization for many, many years. I think he was going on like 25 years. And he was actually getting ready to retire. Unfortunately, um he had recently gotten diagnosed with cancer and was going through a really he was going through cancer treatment and chemo. And he was coming to me to um talk about an employee that he was, struggling to manage and some personnel issues that he was having.
mhm.
And when he was talking to me about it, he was telling me, he's like, "Gosh, this treatment, I'm so tired and worn out and having a hard time concentrating and putting thoughts together." So, of
Right.
course, again, being the HR director, my response was, "Okay, well, you've shared with me about this, medical thing that's going on, and I've, made sure that you had your leave information, but let's talk about this again. Like, maybe you should consider taking a leave of absence. Like, you've
Right.
got, plenty of sick time. This is a protected leave. Like, it sounds like you need to take care of yourself."
Mhm,
And he got so mad at me. Like, I saw him just, like, kind of get bigger, the way people do when they get angry, and he
mhm,
started pointing his finger at me, and he said something like, "No, I'm a loyal employee, and I need to be here, and that's what loyal employees do." And just the aggression and the finger pointing, and it just became
mhm.
so very obvious to me. I'm like, "Oh my god, he's talking about me." Like, he's talking about him, but he's also talking about me. And again,
Right.
I could not believe in this day and age that that was the response I was getting. And as the HR director, I'm like, I spend all day protecting employees from this kind of behavior.
Mhm.
And here I am getting it myself from the top
The
levels.
top. Yep.
And it was just heartbreaking.
I can
Just
I I I can imagine. I mean, here you are working in an environment where you are providing for all the people that work in this particular company. You're making sure they take their maternity leaves. You're making sure they take them guilt free, and to tell them that no, when you're on leave, you do not have to be answering emails when you're in labor. Nobody should have to be answering emails when they're in labor. That's inhumane. And that's the definition, the legal definition of leave. It's a
Mhm,
leave. It means no work. It means that legally you're entitled to that time for a specific reason,
mhm,
which the people in your organization wear, which you wear. And I love that you said, now, I wrote down a couple of things that I love you said. And I'm also going to say that you talked about bragging rights. And I've been in education for a long time. I was in teaching for over 21 years. And I know plenty about bragging rights. And it was kind of this thing where, well, I'm the one that gets here the earliest in the morning, and I'm the one that
mhm,
leaves the latest at the end of the day. And if you leave on time, you have to provide a reason for everybody because you're leaving on time. Oh, I have a
mhm,
doctor's appointment. And that translates into motherhood, where
mhm,
you feel obligated to work until the possible last minute. It's lovely that in California you have that option to take that pregnancy disability. But in a lot of states, the laws are a little different.
mhm,
And, you know, that's a legal right of the worker, of the
mhm,
individual. And you're
mhm,
fighting for the people in your organization.
mhm,
And then when it's your turn, it becomes clear that it looks good on paper, right?
mhm,
We do it because we have to. But when it happens to us with our HR
mhm,
director, we're not cool with it. And you talked about how those 4 weeks of pregnancy disability were a critical time and how you need to be physically and mentally ready for pregnancy. So, and a couple other things that I really like you talked about, but talk to me about, this is your second pregnancy.
Mhm.
During pregnancy, you have unfortunately lost your mom to cancer. So you have
Mhm.
dealt with something that was very, difficult and challenging. I mean, you're growing a life and you're saying goodbye to another life. And we know
Mhm.
all those things are part of our human experience, but to have them
Mhm.
happen at the same time, um, I can't imagine what that felt like. And then to have the tail end of your pregnancy with your director saying, oh, you're going on vacation, when we clearly
Mhm.
know that a leave of absence for pregnancy, any leave of absence, is not a vacation, it's a need and it's a right. And she says, you're going on vacation. And then when you come back, she's upset that you haven't checked with her or,
Mhm.
worked, even though you were on leave.
Mhm.
So what's your emotional state during pregnancy and as things unfold with going back to work and this feeling of loom and gloom and she's not talking to me, people are starting to
Mhm.
notice what's going on. So what's going
Mhm.
on in your head with all that?
Yeah, what I mean, as you can imagine, there's a lot of stress and a lot of questioning myself and going, gosh, like, is this where I want to be? Like, do I need to look for another job? Like, I had this realization that I had worked so hard for the last 3 years to make a difference. And while I had made a difference in a lot of the employees' lives, I couldn't change the top level, and that was always going to bleed down. And the other thing about this organization, and very sadly, this the CEO, and I can understand why she, being a female CEO, I can't imagine how difficult that is and how much you have to prove yourself. But
Hmm.
unfortunately for her, that translated into leading with fear and intimidation, and quite honestly, frequently belittling her executive team, or berating, like when you got something wrong or you did something wrong, and her executive team was not perfect by any means. Like there were definitely some leaders in there that needed stern discussions, needed to be moved out of the organization. Like there was a lot going on. But
Right.
unfortunately, she chose to berate them and have those conversations in front of the entire leadership team.
Wow.
And it scares the whole team, and I had spent the last 3 years trying to build this bridge of trust between us, and having these difficult
Mhm.
conversations with her and saying, "Look, you can't treat people that way. You can't have these discussions in front of the rest of the team. You are scaring your young and new leaders. They are afraid of you, and I know that because they're coming to me and they are telling me they are afraid of you." And that's not what you want.
Mhm.
You're not getting the best out of your people. You're not going to grow the organization in a positive way. You cannot lead people this way. And we had
Absolutely.
really, and she did try to work on it. And that's why, she brought in a leadership consultant to work with the whole team. But it just became very clear that she either was unable or unwilling to actually change. And I realized that I could not have the positive impact that I wanted to,
Mhm.
which was very, very disheartening for me. So with all of that going on, and by the way, the when I went back to work, that was about mid-August, and I had lost my mom in October the year before. So we were quickly creeping up on the 1-year anniversary of losing my mom.
Mhm.
And so things really escalated in, I think it was about mid-September, end of September. Um, I, I was getting sadder and lower and lower, which is not who I am. I am known for being the bubbly, happy,
Mhm.
always find a silver lining, get knocked down, get back up. That's who I am through and through.
Gotcha.
But I was finding it harder to find that person in me, and then it all came to a head one weekend. And my beautiful, wonderful, strong-headed 4-year-old daughter, she and I don't even know what we were fighting about, but we got into a power struggle
Mhm.
one weekend. And the other important thing to know about me is I grew up in an verbally abusive household. And so before becoming a parent, I had done a lot of therapy to deal with my childhood trauma, and I
Mhm.
had decided, I was not going to parent like that. I was not going to use fear to get my children to behave. And this weekend, she and I are in this power struggle, and I lose it, and I find myself screaming at her
Mhm.
and consciously choosing to try to scare her into
Gotcha.
behaving. Um, and my amazing husband, he finally comes and he taps me on the shoulder. And he goes, "Tag, let me take over. Like, step out. You need to get a breath." And and I went to our room, and I was just overcome with shame, just the worst shame.
Mhm.
Because I knew that that's not how I wanted to parent, and I knew exactly the kind of impact that behavior has on a kid because I went through it myself. Um, and I just hit this horrible, horrible low, and I was bawling and crying. And normally, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes all the time. But I always get to this point where I'm upset about it, I'm crying about it, but I know tomorrow's another day. And I know I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna try again. But this time I was crying and bawling, and I found myself just wishing that I wouldn't wake up the next day
Mhm.
and just thinking it's too hard. It hurts too bad. I can't keep doing this.
Mm.
Um and it was horrible, and part of me was even thinking like, Katie, what's going on? Where's your light? Where's that little sliver of light that is
Mhm.
always in you that says tomorrow's another day, you have a chance to make it better? And I couldn't find it. And I my husband was able to get our daughter down for a nap, and the baby was taking a nap, and I came out to him and I go, "Babe, I'm not okay. Something's really wrong with me."
Mhm.
And it was at that point that I realized I'm like, "Oh my god, through the whole pregnancy, my doctor had been talking, they tell you about postpartum depression, and they tell you what to look for, and they even give you little quizzes every couple of appointments to like check for
Right.
symptoms." And I'm like, I think I might have postpartum depression." Um and he looks at me and he's like, "Babe, you got to call your doctor. You need to you need to call your doctor." And so with his support, I did. I um I called my doctor that next Monday, and I'm so grateful because everyone from the receptionist that I talked to, because I called her, and I was just feeling so much shame over this whole thing.
Mhm.
And even the idea that maybe I had postpartum depression, and my voice was shaking, and she was so kind and never questioned me at all. She's like, "Okay, let's see, how soon we can get you in." And they were able to get me in the next day.
Mm.
And I went in and I again talked to a doctor that thankfully I had a really good relationship with, who knew me, who knew how I faced, my previous pregnancies and the attitude that I
Mhm.
brought to it. And I told her what happened. And I told her, I'm like, suicide feels like a strong word, but I didn't want to wake up. I wanted it to
Mhm.
end. Um, and she just looked at me with the most empathy and kindness and zero judgment. There was
Mhm.
just not even an iota of judgment. And just she gifted me with belief, quite honestly. She just
Mhm.
gave me the gift of believing what I said, validating my feelings, and then saying, "Okay, let's talk about some options." And we talked about everything. I had already been seeing a therapist during the pregnancy. And so I told her, I was like, "Yep, I've already reached out to her to, get something scheduled."
Right.
And she's like, "Do you want to consider taking some medication?" And I'm like, I'm open to it. I can't. keep feeling like this. I don't want to hit this low again. This is not okay with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about some medication options, and and made a plan to move forward. Um, and it's one of the hardest experiences I've ever had in my life, because I mean, the shame was overwhelming, but I also had this thought, because I'm not a therapist by any means, but looking back at my childhood, I do think my mom had some kind of undiagnosed depression or anxiety or some kind of mental health, because I remember her being so sad all the time,
Mm.
just so sad. And I just kept thinking, my daughter cannot grow up watching her mom be like that. I don't care what I have to do. I have to pull myself out of this. I have to find a way forward, because I will not let her have the childhood that I had. I will not let her memories of me be, well, mommy was always really sad. Um,
Gotcha.
and it gave me, it it gave me the motivation to move forward, but
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't easy, and so I did both. I took the medication. The first one did not go well, so we had to try a different one,
Mm-hmm.
and it helped a little bit, and seeing a therapist helped as well. But I knew that what had triggered it was my job, was the environment,
Gotcha.
the toxic environment that I was in, and I knew I had to leave. And so that's when, my husband and I started having some really tough conversations about getting myself out of this job. And the mental state that I was in, I told him, I was like, normally if I was going to quit a job, I'd find something else before I quit,
Right.
but I can't do that with this. I'm not in a state that I can show up in an interview in a way that I would be proud of. Um, and you know, I cannot work to the level that
Mm-hmm.
I like to present myself as. Um, and I just need to get out of this job and then make a plan. Um, and so it was really, really hard. Um, yeah.
Getting yeah, I was going to ask you, and in fact, you mentioned it. That I was going to ask you, did you think it was a
Mhm,
combination of factors that led to the postpartum depression? But you already addressed that. You said, it was
mhm,
mostly the work environment that was causing all that. And I can imagine, because I've been in hostile work environments too, in hostile teaching
mhm,
environments. I can imagine that all that hostility and that feeling of people like staring at you funny or thinking
mhm,
less of you because you actually exercise your legal right to have
mhm,
those weeks and that bonding time with your baby, which is super
mhm.
important. And I mean, kudos to California lawmakers for having that present, because not every state
Mhm,
has that. um, you actually exercise your rights as a worker and as a
mhm,
mother, as a woman. You did nothing wrong, but they made you
mhm,
feel that you were doing something wrong. And eventually, what happens when they put all those pressures on us is that all that hostility and all that pressure kind of builds up, right? And then it's gonna
mhm.
come out somewhere, it's gonna explode somewhere, and
Yeah.
you defined it so well. I think it's valuable, hugely valuable, that you had the experience of remembering your mom being really sad all the time with you growing up, and you knew you didn't want that for your daughter.
Mhm,
And I love this doctor. Number one, she asked you if you were um, okay with 8 weeks of postpartum, and you said
mhm,
no, 8 weeks wasn't enough. Okay, I'm going to give you 12. And number two, you spoke about how understanding she was when you called and said, I think I have postpartum depression. And that's really valuable, because a lot of new parents look at those postpartum depression scales and those calls to the doctor as something scary, but you looked at it
mhm,
as something educational that informed you. And when you felt it, you saw it happening, you knew to put your finger on it right away. So
Mhm.
I hear you say your husband was hugely supportive, and so was your OB,
Mhm.
and that's amazing. I mean, there are wonderful medical professionals out there that are not about the shaming, they're about the support and they're about the
Mhm.
validating.
Mhm.
Was there somebody um was there somebody in your life that was maybe not so supportive at that time, or was there a particular group of people that you felt more ashamed and you didn't want to say it? I
Mhm.
mean, is it something you kind of shared openly, or you kind of kept it confined to your husband and your OB and your therapist?
Yeah, so for me, right away, especially after my doctor validated, like, yes, this is postpartum depression, like there's absolutely something going on here. It was very important to me because I was feeling so much shame. Because my brain works in two ways. It's got like this very emotional feeling portion, and then
Mm-hmm.
it's got this very logical portion, and they don't talk to each other most of the time. Like I have two conversations going on in my head. And so the very emotional part of my brain was feeling shame and failure because
Mm-hmm.
my identity is really wrapped up in being this amazing career woman and leader
Mm-hmm.
and having widespread positive impact on the people that I work with,
Mm-hmm.
balanced with being a super mom and being present and being there for my kids and being a positive warm light in their
Mm-hmm.
life. And this postpartum depression took both of those away from me, and I just felt like a failure, just absolute failure in everything, and I lost myself. And I was like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't even know who I am anymore with this. Now the logical part of my brain was saying, "This is a disease. This is an illness.
Mm-hmm.
Treat it like an illness." And for me, one of the ways that I cope with shame and discomfort is talking about it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was pretty open for those. Like, I didn't go around telling people who weren't asking me, but for
Right.
the people who asked me or who noticed, "Hey, Katie, like something seems off. Like, what's going on with you?" I told them, I was like, "Look, I've got postpartum depression. Like, I'm going through it right now." Um,
Mm.
and, support is such an interesting thing because a lot of people do things to support you and try to support you, and especially my husband. Um, but you don't always feel that support, especially when it comes to, I can speak about postpartum depression, but I imagine it's very similar with any kind of depression.
Mm-hmm.
He was spending, even, I mean, he's already a very hands-on dad, but he was spending even more time with the kids and making sure, dinner was getting made because I was coming
Mm-hmm.
home and I'd have to tap out and be like, "Babe, I don't have any energy or enthusiasm for life. Like all I can do is lay on the couch after work." Like that's where I was. And, I was having these horrible moments where I was watching him play with our two beautiful kids and
Mm-hmm.
knowing that it's a really happy, wonderful moment and that I should be really happy about it, but not feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
And so he did a lot to keep the family going, and he would check in on me and he would ask, "Okay, how are you doing?" And thinking back on it now, I don't know if it was his fear or my own fear, but when he would ask that, I would kind of feel like I was in a petri dish. And while the words he was using was, "How are you doing?" What I felt like he was asking me was, "Katie, do you feel like you're going to kill yourself today?" Like, that's the way it felt. And so,
Oh, I see.
while and again, I couldn't tell you, it's probably a combination of both because he was very scared for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's not a trained therapist. He has nothing in his life experience to relate to what I was going through. And so while he was there and supporting me internally, I didn't feel the support. And even
Okay.
when I talked to our mom friends, and shared with them, I've got postpartum depression, like I was surprised a lot of them were like, "Oh yeah, I did too, I did too." But
Mm-hmm.
again, depression and postpartum depression, it's it's such an uncomfortable topic. And I think most moms feel so much shame, and it's such a painful thing to go through. You don't want to remember it. You don't want to think about it. You want it to just be in the past and be done. And so while they were supportive in saying, "Yeah, I had it too, I took medicine, I went to therapy," no one really opens up about it. And nobody really knows what to say. And I didn't know what I needed either.
Hmm.
People would ask me like, "What can I do to support you?" And I had no idea. And looking back, the truth is I had to support myself because that's where it all is. It's all in your mind and your internal dialogue. And
Hmm.
so, as much as I was loved, all that support really wasn't making a huge difference to my emotions because it's the work I had to do myself. And getting out
I
of that job
got you.
and removing that trigger. Um, and
Hmm.
so yeah, so support's a really interesting concept, because we always say we want
Hmm.
support, like, you should support people, but it's a two-way street. You've gotta
Yes.
be able to also accept that support to feel it. Um
Yes. And I love how you talked about, I knew what I was feeling, I knew what I needed, but people on the outside, such as my husband, they thought they were helping, they were doing their
Mhm,
best at helping, but the words they were using or the things they were asking were making me feel more and more like a laboratory experiment, like
yeah.
I was under a
Mhm,
microscope. And you said it best. It's at the end of the day, what it is that you have to solve what's going on inside, because what what happens with mental health, of course, is that we can put name tags on it and label it and
mhm,
etc, but the true experience of it, we cannot. I mean, the books, the medical books, the research
mhm,
papers can tell us that these are the symptoms, this is what happens, this is
mhm,
why it happens. They can
mhm,
give us all the, but
mhm,
the actual lived experience of the person with postpartum depression
mhm,
is completely unique to you, and
mhm,
it's unique to everybody else. And I love how you said, people were asking and etc, but the help they were offering is not what I needed. Maybe sometimes all we need to do is just sit next to the person that is struggling with perinatal mental health and say,
mhm,
is there, I'm here. Is there
mhm,
anything you need? Or simply, I'm here and we can just sit together.
mhm,
Um, what do you need? You need a, you need a, would you like to look into some support groups? What is it
mhm,
that is going to help you? Right.
mhm,
And um, so that's very, and you also mentioned how that was very descriptive, how you talked about it. So I love that, because for any listeners that are going through postpartum depression right now, I think hearing your experience is very reassuring, that one of the things we feel with mental health, especially in the prenatal period, is we feel broken, we feel
mhm,
defective, we feel that something is not right
mhm,
with us. And you sharing your experience is throwing light. And I know you did say that you had other friends that also went through it, but of course kept it
mhm,
quiet, because that's what we do
mhm,
with things
mhm,
that feel a little shameful. We keep them
mhm,
quiet, and that's understandable. And everybody's entitled, and everybody has the right to experience and discuss their experience how they feel.
mhm,
But there is such value in talking about it, because then other moms that come after you, they're gonna be like, it's okay to go to the doctor and tell them I'm not doing okay. There
mhm,
is a lot of fear sometimes, because people think they're gonna take my
mhm,
children away, things like that.
mhm,
But I love that you made that connection, and you said, I had to bring myself back up. And of course you did it with therapy, you did it with medication, guided by your doctor and etc. And that really um, worked really well. So that's really amazing. How, so your first pregnancy, you did not have any experience with postpartum perinatal mood, nothing like that, right? It was just the second
Nothing.
one.
Yep. Yep. Just the second one.
Okay, I
And
got you.
no,
And and it, I mean, it sounds like this doctor you have is pretty amazing because all
she really
that,
is.
yeah, all that support and all that, there is such an important element of not shaming, of not making
Mhm.
you feel again broken when you
Mhm.
call and or dismissive. Sometimes it's not that they make
Mhm.
you feel bad, they are dismissive,
Mhm.
right? Sometimes in
Mhm.
doctors' offices. So what
Mhm.
a huge value for her to be there every step of the way.
Mhm.
Um, how long did it take you, Katie, to start feeling better? And of course, we know this is individual experience. There is no
Mhm.
prescription that says in 3 weeks and a half, I shall be amazing again. But how long did it take you to start to get that flame back that you had lost?
Sure, that's such a good question, and honestly, it was my one of my biggest worries while I was going through this. I was terrified. I was like, "Oh my God, is this my life now? Is this do I
Mhm.
have to battle this forever now?"
Yeah,
And especially with, I'm glad I took the medication, but even on the medication, I was not who I wanted to be. Like it helped me from
gotcha.
getting really, really low, but I did not enjoy being on it. So I took the medication while I was still at my job, and then the minute I, no longer worked there,
Mm-hmm.
because I did give them a 30-day notice. So I took the medication for about a month, and then I immediately got off it because I knew that the main trigger was that job. So if I didn't have that, it's like, okay, well, I think it's safe to come off the medication and then see where I'm at. And gosh, I hoped, I so hoped that it was just the job that as soon as I wasn't there anymore, I'd be back to normal, and that wasn't the case.
Mm,
It took, much longer, and I think no matter how long it is, it's always going to be longer than you hope it's going to be. Um, but after getting off the medication, it was probably another 2 months before I started feeling like myself, and I that was 2 months of not really working and only, pursuing creative endeavors and, consciously choosing to not super worry about the future and plan out the future because I knew that I needed that break because I was so burnt out. I think that's
mm,
another thing that had led to the postpartum depression and, going into my maternity leave, I was already so burnt out and exhausted from my work and that environment. Um, and I needed to recover from all of that, all of those, factors and, grieving for my mom. I mean, there's so many things that go into mental health. And
right.
I needed the time to just be and purely focus on finding my internal balance again. Unfortunately, it was the holidays. So, I really, my husband and I, we decided, okay, let's, your last days, beginning of November, take the next 2 months, enjoy the holidays, enjoy the family. We will figure out the work piece in January, if you're well enough. And I would say it yeah, it took that time and it was hard. I'm an overachiever by nature, so
Mm,
not planning the future, not having, a roadmap and goals, like it was hard, but it's something that I
mhm.
had to do to recover. But I think that's, for your listeners and anybody who might be experiencing postpartum depression, like that's the one thing I wish somebody had told me loud and clear is it will end. You will feel like yourself again one day. It'll probably take longer than you want it to.
Mhm.
And like you said, it's unique to everybody. And I can't tell you how many times I Googled how long does postpartum depression last? Like how long is this gonna last?
Oh.
And and just looking for some kind of answer to just know that it was going to end. And that's what I want people to hear is that it does end. You will feel like yourself again.
Mm,
And the funny thing about feeling like yourself is what feels like yourself again is not necessarily what, a year ago would have felt like yourself. People
Right.
grow, people change.
Mhm.
You get new normals. Something becomes the new normal and you find that
Yeah.
happiness again and it feels like you again. So just hold on to that and know that one day you will feel whole again. And that's really what I want, especially women going through this to hear and know and just and have, use that as your light to know that this is not forever. This is one little short chapter of your life, and soon you'll turn
Mhm.
the page and it'll be a whole new chapter. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the big lesson there too, other than what you said, which I love, you will feel like yourself again. You will come out of this because there is that desperation of
mhm,
sitting in that despair and
mhm,
feeling like, is this who I'm gonna be for the rest of my
mhm,
life? But I think it's also the fact that there is that shame and there is that silence around postpartum depression. And what we need
mhm,
the listeners to know as well is that, not that it makes it any better, okay, because it
mhm,
doesn't, but
mhm,
it's good to know at the logical level that postpartum depression is something that is very, very common.
mhm,
That not only happens to biological moms, it happens to dads as well. It happens to adoptive mothers as well, because it's connected to many factors, not just the pregnancy hormones and etc. So it happens to a lot of people. What happens is, of course, we keep it so quiet that when it happens to us, it feels like we're the only ones going through it.
mhm,
Um, I love that you talked about the new normal. And of course, that's a phrase that we heard plenty after 2020. But I agree with you. Any big, hard experience in life that we go
mhm,
through, it's going to transform us and we're going to come out
mhm,
of it being a different person. And
mhm,
but a person that, because it's been through that, has grown in ways that we didn't know before it happened.
mhm,
So tell me about the before and after
mhm,
that postpartum depression. You decide this job is a big factor in why this happened.
mhm.
This is not it. I have huge burnout. This job is eating me away. Not worth it. Awesome decision.
Yeah.
You decide this is not it. And so you go through a postpartum depression. Your husband says you don't have to find another job right away. You stop your impulses to be looking for jobs, because we know when we're overachievers, it's like,
Yeah.
I must be doing stuff all the time.
Yes.
And you, okay, take that time. Your husband says, yeah, take the time, the
Mhm.
holidays. You engage in creative activities, which we will talk a little more in a little bit, because I love that. Uh, but you start to unfold the new Katie. And so, what does the after mean for you as far as who you are as a mom, as a wife, as a woman after the postpartum depression, and who you are as far as worker,
Mhm.
career, job? Where do you go from there? What's the before and after? What's the after, I guess?
Sure. So I'll start by saying that I really feel like sometimes life makes you stop. I'm an incredibly stubborn person, so I don't like to stop. Like once I have a direction, I go 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 until life says absolutely not. You are done with this path, and it's happened
Mhm,
a few times in my life now. So I know what it feels like when life is telling me to stop.
mhm,
And this experience was definitely one of those moments, and I was like, "Okay, I can't work for this organization anymore. I have to pause. Okay, let's reevaluate." Like, I like HR, it's very rewarding. I really get to have this wonderful positive impact on people and business. So with my emotional and logical brain, they're in their happy place. Um, but if I could do anything else, what would I do? Like, now is a good time to consider a pivot. and I didn't have anything in mind, but while I was seeing my therapist and, talking about the postpartum depression and quitting my job and trying to figure out what's next, it was actually her suggestion that I look at becoming a life coach.
Mhm.
And I didn't really know anything about life coaches. And what she said to me, she's like, Katie, you have been through so much in your life. You have great insights into mindset and moving through difficult challenges.
Mm.
You should be a life coach and start your own business. And then you can take on as many or as few clients as you want so that you can show up and be the mom that you want to be and still be that overachiever that you are.
Mhm.
And I kind of honestly, I scoffed at her. I was like, "Huh, me, an entrepreneur? Absolutely not. I like rules. I like structure.
Right.
I like safety. Like going out and being a business person and trying to sell myself. Like,
Mhm.
absolutely not. That's a horrible idea. But the thought was planted, right? And so
Mhm.
after my couple of months of trying not to think about what I was going to do next, and just not feeling like my heart was in HR. Like I kept trying to think about going back to a different HR job, and my heart just wasn't in it. And I was like, well, let me look into this life coach thing. Like she suggested it, I should at least do a little research on it. And I was very fortunate that I found a certification program that allowed you to take about half of the certification for free. And I was like,
Oh,
okay, well,
wonderful.
I'll try it out, see what it is, see what you do, and learn about it. So I started taking that, and what I learned very quickly is that coaching, whether it's life coaching, fitness coaching, leadership coaching, it's what I had been doing in HR all along. It just depends on the topic
Ah,
that you're discussing because
okay.
really what coaching is helping people to reframe their challenges
Mhm.
and organize their goals and find those steps forward to to do whatever it is that they want to do in their life and make the impossible possible. And my whole
Mhm.
life I've loved making the impossible possible. I love when somebody tells me something's impossible, it can't be done. I'm like, I'll show you. I'll show you it can be done. And that's exactly what coaching is. And so I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. I was like, no, I was meant to do this. This is my absolute favorite part of being HR is helping people see their own greatness and seeing what they can do and opening their eyes to the possibilities available to them.
Mm.
And so going through that, they tell you you need to pick a niche and something that's really important to you. So as I was thinking about, okay, what do I want to coach on? What do I have the skills? What do I have the experience on? And it came to me that I really could have used a coach myself as I was growing my career and becoming a mother.
Mhm.
And as I listened to all my mom friends, the same problems come up over and over again. We're exhausted, we're burnt out. We feel like we're in this tug of war game between being the moms we want to be and being the career women or,
Yeah.
leaders in our careers that we want to be. And it seems like this impossible struggle and this impossible thing to balance. Um,
Mhm.
and I was like, that is what I want to help people with because after everything I've gone through, that's what that's what I've found. That's what I want to do moving forward.
Mhm.
And it also came out of another piece of advice that my therapist had given me was she's like, when you're thinking about what you want to do, write down, what it is that you want for your life. That's the first step, and that's a pretty easy step for people. But then the next step is why. Why do you want those things in your life?
Mhm.
And so, when I had done that exercise and then looked at starting a coaching practice, I was like, this aligns perfectly. All the flexibility, the working with people that, I respect and feel good around, um, being able to help people grow, being able to be an example for my children and show them that nothing is impossible. It just checked all the boxes for me. So then I jumped in. I jumped into the deep end and got certified and started my business. and recently launched a course, an online course,
Wonderful.
that because again, I'm a mom with two littles. I know
Hmm.
we have no time, and we're always the last person on our list to take care of. And so my goal was,
Absolutely.
how do I get coaching to moms who have no time? And, what would I have agreed to? And I was like, 2 minutes. I can give myself 2 minutes every day. So the course I've created is little micro bits of coaching, 2 minutes a day for 30 days to help you move the needle on your work-life balance goals, on your career goals, dealing with that mom guilt, all of that. So I'm really
Mhm.
excited to have just launched that and have that available for my clients now.
Wonderful. And we would put a link to your, people can access that through your website,
Mhm.
correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. We will put a link to your website on the show notes. Uh, and we will also make sure to mention all the social handles and everything as well as we wrap up the episode. So, what is one, two big lessons that you would extract from your time working for that charter school as head of HR? And is that experience something you still look at with, do you get a ball in the pit of your stomach every time you think about that job? Or are you now at the point where you're able to extract those lessons and look at it like, okay, that was part of my history, it's not part of my history anymore, but it was there and it's over and it's okay that it's over? How do you
Yeah.
feel about it? That's a
Well, it
multi
definitely
question, three level
well,
question.
it took me many, many months to get there, but I can happily say I am to that stage where I can look back at it and see the big picture and see
Mm,
the purpose of going through it. And this is something I love about my life in general because I've gone through many terrible traumatic experiences in my life, but when I look back, I see that I had to go through them to get to the next step
mhm,
and to be able to offer more good into the world from the lessons that I learned. And so I can very clearly look back and be like, if I hadn't gone through that exact experience,
mhm.
I would have never dreamed of starting my own business. Again, I did not identify as an entrepreneur. This was not anything on
Right.
my radar. But this forced me to consider that as an option, and it's the
Mhm,
best thing that's ever happened to me. I can say that I am the best version of myself that I've ever been, and I'm sure I will continue to develop and grow and find an even better version of myself, but when I compare who I am today to
mhm,
who I was 6 months ago, to a year ago, I'm so proud of the person that I have become
mhm.
by going through all of this pain and finding the mindset and the ways to stay determined and I don't want to lie to anybody, it sucked. It
Yeah.
really, really sucked, and there were many
Mhm,
days where I didn't know how I was going to go forward or how this chapter was going to end.
mm,
But looking back, I can say it did end, and I am starting a beautiful new chapter now, and that's what I want to help other moms, other women experience and help give them that hope and that knowledge that look, it we're not even going to joke about it. It sucks, but we have so much power, and I think that is the big lesson that I learned is really my own empowerment and the power that every single person has, especially when they decide, this is not what I want my life to be. I want it to be different.
mm,
I
mm,
don't know what the way is, but I'm going to find a way. And the minute you decide that, everything starts to change.
mm,
You start finding the little tiny baby steps, or you start meeting the right people, or somebody says something to you, or you hear a song on the radio, or like you start feeling all of these things in the universe pushing
mhm.
you towards the life that you want to have. because you're
Absolutely.
open to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's one of the things I can very clearly look back on and say, okay, the universe, it forced me to stop, and I'm grateful for that because it made me consciously choose to create a different life for myself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. And it is true when you find that purpose, and you get to that realization, right? This part of my life was okay. It's done. That's not what I want to continue doing. Now this is what I want to do with my life. This is what feels really aligned with me, with my purpose, my passion. And then things start lining up nicely.
Mhm.
Sometimes they catch you by surprise. You don't even know
Mhm.
they're coming, and they're coming. It's
Mhm.
really
Yeah.
amazing. Um, how I remember, in closing, I remember you mentioned that during the time you took a break between recovering from postpartum
Mhm.
depression and starting to figure out your next step as far as career path, etc.
Mhm.
You use that time to develop a lot of creative activities. So tell me a little bit
Mhm.
more about that. And I also want to know if that's something you're also incorporating in your coaching with clients, that creativity aspect.
Yeah, so something I had started right before I went back to work was I decided to put myself out there and start a little YouTube channel, doing something that was really fun. I love to read to my kids. It's my favorite thing to do, and reading with
Perfect.
enthusiasm, and I found out that there's all these channels on YouTube where people are reading kids books.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, why not? We'll see what happens. So I started that and was so surprised that anybody was listening to my channel, and I got
Mm-hmm.
subscribers. And so after
Oh.
leaving my job, that was kind of my first thought was, okay, well maybe this is what I'm supposed to do is I'm gonna be a YouTube star. Like why not? And I'll make
Yes.
money off of this channel. So unfortunately, and again, it was a great learning experience because quite
Mm,
honestly, doing the channel, even though it ultimately didn't work out, gave me the confidence to realize that I do connect with people.
mhm.
You hope you connect with people, but there's something about social media, oddly enough, like there's a lot of flaws to social media. But
Yes.
one of the positives, especially with this YouTube channel, is I realized that I was connecting with people
Mhm.
and that I don't know why I assumed that I annoyed people, but, people connected with my voice and, my favorite
Right.
stories that I like to read to my kids. And it was very cool because I have a new baby nephew too, and he lives really far away from me. So my brother and his wife were like putting on my YouTube book so that Auntie Katie
Oh,
could read to him. And
oh,
it
that's
was, it was
precious.
so sweet and so much fun. Unfortunately, I did run into a little bit of a copyright issue because it's not
Mhm.
completely kosher to read books
Mhm.
on YouTube.
Yeah.
Should have researched that. Yeah. Once I found out, I was like, oh no, I have to stop doing this. Um,
I
but
know,
again,
I
it
know.
was it was a great experience in really delving into my creativity that mostly had been suppressed because I was so busy being a mom and being a career woman and not really getting to develop and find that enjoyment. And
Mm,
so it has really bled into my business and just general creativity in enjoying making my website. And with my course, instead of videos, there's like little 2-minute snippet of audio that goes with each day.
oh, I love
And
that. I love
when I was
that.
creating that, if I hadn't done the YouTube channel, I wouldn't have the confidence to do that and not think to myself, oh my god, is my voice gonna annoy people? Like,
Mhm.
now because of the channel, I was able to do those recordings, go and do them fairly comfortably, thinking, "No,
Mhm.
people like the sound of my voice, for whatever reason. It doesn't annoy them. They find it, soothing."
Mhm.
And so, like, everything you do, it all becomes a building block. And again, it really built up my confidence to even consider doing something that wasn't a 9 to 5. I guess that's the biggest thing the YouTube channel gave me is it was
Mm,
the first thing that made me consider that maybe I could do something that wasn't a typical corporate 9 to 5 job.
gotcha.
So, it was that little taste that I needed that then opened the bigger entrepreneurial door for me.
That's so wonderful. We hadn't talked about that. I love that you had a YouTube channel. It's it's one of those things that sometimes you have to kick fear to the curve because
Mhm.
it's a little bit daunting, right? Like I'm gonna put my
Mhm.
name and my image on
Mhm.
YouTube, but you
Yeah.
did it in such a beautiful vehicle, reading kids stories and reading to your children and your nephew and everything. Yes, the copyright is tricky. I have done a bit of reading books on the podcast, but I've
Mhm.
only done excerpts because
Mhm.
I heard about you have to be
Oh.
extra careful at all
Mhm.
times. But yeah, it's sad because you're like, I just want to read the books, you know.
Mhm.
I want to
Yeah.
bring joy to people. I love that. I love that that creativity, that glimpse of light of that YouTube channel made you
Mhm.
start thinking in a different way because it is
Mhm.
true what you said. When we come from an environment that is very corporate, you with working with the charter school, I was working in public education for many years, and education is very corporate, regardless of whether
Mhm.
it's public or private. It's
Yeah.
hard for us to transition to thinking about entrepreneurship,
Mhm.
but what a beautiful world. Now, my final question for you. Um, I could be asking 16 more questions because this is a great conversation. I'm sure our listeners are gonna love it, love every minute of it. Um, what are some small victories or tiny celebrations? And I say small victories and tiny celebrations because a lot of times we're looking for the big rewards, the big
Mhm.
celebrations. But what are the tiny victories, the tiny celebrations that you've already had in your coaching business that help you wake up the next day and
Mhm.
gather up your energy and do more of it because this is awesome?
Oh gosh, I love everyday victories. That's like my mantra. Plus, I like any excuse to celebrate.
Absolutely.
So, um, but victories in my business, I have such a hard time like bragging about myself.
It's okay. Go
Um,
for it. I am giving you
I
free reign. Go.
I think the little everyday things is when I'm talking to a client and they have those aha moments. And
Mm,
it's so funny because everybody reacts the same way. You ask the right question that adjusts their brain, and then every time the client goes, "Huh, that's interesting."
mm-hmm.
And you
Mm-hmm.
can almost just watch their brain shift.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole energy of the conversation changes after that.
Mm,
And then suddenly you're not leading the conversation anymore. You're not pulling the information out of them. They're spooling because you've unlocked their creativity and they're coming up with the best answers and solutions for themselves.
mm-hmm.
And that's one of my absolute favorite things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other successes that happen fairly frequently is I find that I randomly connect with people,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's on a Facebook group or on Instagram, especially if somebody is, putting out something that they're struggling with, or,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I can just look at it and pull from my own life, or just pull a perspective or something that helps me, and just make a little comment about it, and it for whatever reason, it always kinda catches me off guard, and I'm, happily surprised, but they're like, "Oh my yes, that resonates," with like, "Oh my gosh, that's so helpful for me." Like, there was one lady who was, I think just a couple months postpartum, she was getting back into her exercise routine, and she was really struggling with motivation and comparing, her fitness level to her pre-pregnancy fitness level.
Mm-hmm.
And my advice to her was, look, don't try not to compare your fitness level, but if you do,
Right.
compare it to yesterday.
Right. Right.
Break it down, compare it to yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And she said that after her workout, she came back to that comment and she's like, yes, like this was so motivational for me and so helpful. And I love any time that I put a thought out there, with no expectation that, people can take it or leave it. Um,
Right.
but when it resonates with somebody and they're like, yeah, that was helpful. Because no matter what I've done in my career, and I've been through a couple different career changes now, but the core goal has always been to help people and
Mm-hmm.
help them to better their lives. And so, every time I get that little connection, it just really feeds me and reassures me that this is the right path.
Absolutely. And I see that that's the thread that connects everything for you because whether you were in HR or now as a coach, the constant in your life has always been helping and
Mhm.
supporting people. And that's coming through and now you're living it fully, right? Not
Mhm.
bound by this and that and what the head of the organization
Mhm.
says, blah, blah, blah.
Politics.
Politics, exactly. Now it's okay, this is me. I'm putting my work on the table and my desire, my goal is to support you. And here we are. I think
Mhm.
that's a wonderful life mission and something that we have in common, which is why this conversation feels very natural, because we both are about helping people, and that's also what the podcast is about. Well, I how about we tell the listeners your social media handles? Where can they find you online? Your website, any contact, information you want to share
Sure.
with them.
Yeah, well, the best way to contact me is through my website, which is katiescoachingcorner.com. I have a little mini newsletter that you can sign up for that goes out once a week. And I try to make it short, but make it packed full of encouragement, work life balance tips. My absolute favorite Amazon product, just one. I don't want to spam you, but everybody loves a good recommendation, right?
Absolutely.
So that's one way to get a hold of me and check out my course and my sign up to find out when my next group coaching session is. Or if you'd like to work with me one on one, I'd love to work with you. So definitely reach
Hmm.
out about that. The other place you can find me and get a little bit of semi daily encouragement is on Instagram.
Hmm.
So it's Balanced Mama Confessions. And yeah, that Instagram is dedicated to a sprinkling of everything. You'll get the work-life balance tips. You'll
Hmm.
get my mom confessions for the crazy stuff that goes on in my life and the mindset that I now address those crazy things like the baby pooped in the tub the other day. So just a little bit of humor in there, some career tips and things like that. So it's another fun place to see what I'm up to and kind of see what I'm all about.
Perfect. So I hope that the listeners will check out your website and your social media and continue hearing more about your work as a coach. And Katie, it's been a huge pleasure to have you on the show today. It's been a wonderful conversation. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me and letting me share my story with everybody. And, I hope that it made at least one person out there feel less alone and more
Mm.
helpful no matter what you're going through, whether it's postpartum depression or some other challenge in your life. I hope you can see that one way or another there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and you can get there. And honestly, you are enough, and I feel that to your bones. I want your listeners to know they are enough. They
Mhm.
are empowered to make the lives that they want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That feeling of enough, I think it's what we want to promote on everybody. And that's gonna be the overarching feeling that we are going to finish this interview with. So thank you, listeners, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you for listening to Katie's story. I hope it enlightened you and helped you and gave you insights into, how life can throw us different wrenches, but how we can come out victorious after going through all the hurdles that life throws at us. We can come out victorious, and it was lovely to hear your story and hear everything that is possible for all of us, right? Everything that is possible. So see you next week. Thank you for being here. Bye.
Bye.
My dear listeners, today we have discussed postpartum and perinatal mental health in our episode. We have specifically talked about postpartum depression. If you have listened to this episode and you are experiencing symptoms of postpartum depression or a different mood or mental health issue, please contact your medical provider, whether it's a therapist or a doctor. Find help and know that help is available to you. The show notes will also include a link to Postpartum Support International, which is an organization that connects you with therapists in your area and with resources. Okay? Remember, you are not broken, you are not alone, and with help, you will feel better. Thank you for listening today. Hey, you have listened to the Wise Doula podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, everything we discussed today was meant for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not substitute the advice of your medical provider. Would you do us a favor? Follow me on Instagram at LovingBellyDoula. Also, let me know what other topics you would like to see me discuss in this podcast. And please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platforms. Thank you so much. I will see you next week.